In 1989, Batman was one of the best movies in the theaters. Biz Markie caught his girl cheating on him with a friend of hers.
What the fuck?
And the arcades were bustling with the sights and sounds of games that are timeless. But did you know that there are several other arcade games that don't get the credit they deserve for making our trips to the arcades more fun? In this episode of The Big Retro Show, I talk about some of the lesser known games of 1989. I grew up playing Konami's hit arcade game Russian Attack, and it was one of the first games that I bought on the NES when it was ported to that system. So when I discovered that a spiritual successor to that game exists, I was all in. The game is MIA, Missing in Action, and much like in Russian Attack, it is a two-player side-scrolling stabathon with occasional gunplay. You take on the role of a Green Beret whose secret mission it is to rescue some prisoners of war in this two-player co-op cabinet. Have you ever heard the phrase, "Don't bring a knife to a gunfight"? Well, these dudes certainly haven't, because they take on a mission with just a Rambo knife. As you progress through the game's 6 stages, you will encounter a variety of enemies you can stab to death and commandeer their weapons from. The weapons consist mostly of rocket launchers, flamethrowers, guns, and grenades. Most stages have ladders you can run up and down and underground portions of the building. The game is also sprinkled with heavy artillery that tries to snuff you out. MI8's controls are simple. You get buttons to stab, choose extra weapons, and use weapons. Tapping up on the joystick allows you to jump. A large sniper tower awaits you at the end of each stage that you must climb up and take out the guards before rescuing the POWs. There's not a whole lot to the gameplay. It's simple fun that anyone can enjoy. MIA was ported to Microsoft's Game Room servers for the Xbox 360 and PCs. You guys know how much I love arcade light gun games. Beast Busters is one of the best. In Beast Busters, you choose from one of 3 dudes who must save the city from the undead. As told on the game's website, it's still up if you can believe it or not. In a 1999 in-the-strip downtown area, there was an accident of some kind, and the dead began walking, killing, and eating the good people. Frightened beyond belief, the police had given up. Then, the wise mayor declared that anyone who could handle the situation would be rewarded $500,000. Having heard the news, 3 bounty hunters, Johnny, Paul, and Sammy, take on the challenge. It's a campy story that doesn't make sense, but hey, we are talking about a video game here, right? In this 3-player cabinet, you play as Johnny, Paul, or Sammy and take on the undead hordes in 7 levels of gun action. Each of the game's levels features some gnarly zombies, both humans and animals, as well as assorted monsters. There's something so satisfying about seeing their bodies fall apart after a well-placed shot. As with any good light gun game, each stage also has a boss fight you must overcome if you wish to get your greedy hands on the $500,000. You arm yourself with an Uzi, which I must say is the weapon of choice if you are going to take on a zombie horde. You are also armed with grenades. This game is great fun, and it received some sequels in both the Neo Geo arcades and the most recent sequel, a King of the Fighters edition, on smartphones back in 2014. The game itself received ports on the Amiga and the Atari ST. Anyone who's played The Adventures of Bayou Billy will get a familiar feeling when playing Konami's Special Project Y, SPY for short. That's because the game mixes up its levels between beat-em-up, side-scrolling hack-and-slash, and rail shooter stages. In SPY, you play as one of 2 secret agents who must stop an evil organization from launching a nuke. The game is Konami's take on James Bond. It starts you off in a jetpack, shooting enemies and dodging rockets on your way to the enemy's island. The stage reminds me a lot of Space Harrier, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. because I love me some Space Harrier. The game's second stage involves some hefty ass kicking. The game's combat mechanics are a bit janky, nowhere near the caliber of Final Fight or Streets of Rage, and remind me quite a bit of Bayou Billy's fighting. That too was janky. This game does a lot of borrowing from other games. I already talked about Space Harrier and Bayou Billy, but one of the rail shooter stages had me thinking I was playing Contra, and another stage reminded me of Rolling Thunder. While most of the game is spent using your fists and feet, one button shoots, the other kicks. On occasion you find weapons you can use to kill enemies. This game is a quarter muncher, and you will be paying some good coin to see the ending. By the way, did I mention that the game makes you beat it twice? It's enough to make you rage quit, but maybe not, if you have enough quarters. While Spy is not the best arcade game of 1989 and has lots of room for improvement, it deserves a mention as I did have fun during my playthrough. This game did not receive any home ports. Willow! Help me, Willow! Well, myself and my friend JD couldn't help Finn Rizal, but we sure had fun making fun of her. We love the movie Willow, and in 1989, Capcom released a punishing run-and-gun based on the movie. In Willow, the arcade game, you play as Willow Ufgood, a Nelwyn who must save the princess Laura Danon from the evil Queen Bavmorda. You take off from your village with some acorns and shoot the pig dogs and enemy troopers you come across during your journey. The game also lets you play as a scoundrel Mad Mardigan, but rather than acorns, you fight with a sword. The game's 6 levels are ripped out of the movie, including the Daikini Crossroads, Sherlindria's Forest, Finn Rizal's Island, Sorcia's Camp, Tira's Lane, and finally Nagmar Castle. All of the levels look great and are fun to play in. The game's controls are simple, one button shoots and the other jumps. What more could you want? The game's enemies consist mostly of Nagmar troops, trolls, pig dogs, and other monsters that appear in the movie. The enemies themselves aren't too difficult to beat, but the bosses are downright brutal. As you kill enemies and find chests, you collect coins that you can use to purchase various upgrades from a store that pops up in the levels. It's really useful to power up at these stores, and collecting the coins means you can buy these game-changing upgrades. Willow's graphics and music are Capcom goodness, and the game sprinkles in cutscenes from the movie, adding to the overall Willow feel of the game. This game did not receive a port to the home console, however, Capcom developed a Zelda-like Willow game for the NES, which is an awesome game in its own right. The NES version goes for $63 complete in box and $18 loose. Another great Capcom game release is Dynasty Wars. You play as one of 4 Chinese generals who ride into battle on horseback and take on a mission to stop a rebellion. Your goal in Dynasty Warriors is to stop the Huangqing, the group that is responsible for the unrest of the Han Dynasty, and to defeat its leader, Dong Zhuo. The game's controls consist of 3 buttons. One button allows you to attack left, the other right, and the third button allows you to use magic attacks, which consist of fire, a guy who shoots arrows by your side, a boulder attack, and an explosion attack. You fight wave after wave of enemies in this side-scrolling beat-em-up, and you can also defeat them using charge attacks, which I used heavily during my playthrough. You face off against a boss at the end of each level. There are 8 stages in all. Each of the 4 generals has their varying levels of attack power and vitality. The game's enemies drop orbs that you can use to level up your characters, and blue orbs that improve your weapon. This game is a quarter muncher, but not totally unbeatable. It's probably easier with a friend. The game's graphics are some of the best in Capcom's storied arcade history, and the sounds are also top-notch. Dynasty Wars was ported over to the home computers of the time, and NEC ported it over in Japan only to the PC Engine Super CD-ROM. I saw a sold listing on eBay for that version of the game for $113, and one that sold as high as $300. Let's talk about Taito's answer to Atari's Rolling Thunder. No fancy story here, nothing out of the realm of arcade gaming, that is. You play as a cop who must clean up the streets by killing everything he sees. You take to the streets armed with your trusty handgun in this 2-player co-op run and gun and take on scores of villains. The game is broken up into 6 stages, each placing you in a crime scenario that you must foil, such as a prison break or a bank robbery. The game's controls are pretty straightforward. One button shoots, the other jumps. Crime City awards you a life bar that will deplete rather quickly as you play through, because after all, this is an arcade game, but this is better than having one-hit deaths. The weapons in this game are a joy to use and consist of machine guns and shotguns. Much like in Rolling Thunder, your ammo is limited, and if you run out, you will have to knock out your enemies with your fists. The enemies in this game aren't too difficult at all, and you can probably breeze through this game in under 20 minutes. Most of the enemies drop ammo supplies, but some drop baggies of cocaine. During certain points of the game, it turns into a third-person shooter, which is a nice break in the action and spices things up. The game's graphics and sounds are quite enjoyable, and I really enjoyed fighting in the different scenes. Sadly, this game was not ported to any home consoles. Castle of the Dragon threw its hat in the ring in 1989 among the great side-scrolling fantasy hack-and-slash games and held its own for the most part. The game came to the arcades from Athena, a little-known Japanese developer who brought this hidden gem to US gamers by way of publisher Sita. Castle of the Dragon follows the story of 2 young knights who must rescue a princess from a dragon named Zurib, who has kidnapped her. Your journey spans 6 stages filled with Zurib's minions. You start the game in full plate armor, but as you take damage, your life bar decreases and your armor is torn off. You are armed with a sword but can acquire several weapons, including a morning star and an axe. You can also acquire power-ups that will allow you to do fire and lightning attacks. You also get a shield that will block certain attacks. Other power-ups that you can snag while you are killing fools include boots that will make you walk faster, a gauntlet that makes you temporarily invincible, a full-scale armor restore, and an hourglass that gives you more time. What makes this game cool is that you can jump from the foreground to the background and fight on 2 different planes. It's not something that I have seen executed in this manner in another arcade game to date. Most of the enemies in this game can be beat with a swipe of the sword. Its platforming elements prove to be a bit more challenging than the enemies themselves. While the boss fights in this game are impressive and fun to fight, not every stage has a boss at the end. Not a big deal, but it's just something to notice. The game is not too difficult at all, and my playthrough lasted a little under 15 minutes. The graphics and character sprites used in this game are big and colorful, and give the game a sense of beefiness. The music in this game is a bit repetitive, and the quality is lacking, but the guitar riffs used in the game do rock. They just need to be remixed and remastered. Castle of the Dragon did get a port to the NES, and a copy goes for $52 complete in box, and $19 loose. Let's talk about Tecmo's Wildfang, or Tecmo Knight as it's called in the US. Boy, this one is a weird one. You play as a knight who rides on either an ogre-like dude or a tiger and take on a bunch of monsters on a quest to defeat the mythical monster Wildfang. The game's combat is very much like Tecmo's other arcade beat-em-up, Ninja Gaiden. You start off riding on the back of the ogre named Smokeman, who uses melee attacks to pummel the bad guys. With the press of a button, you can ride on a tiger who grants you a better attack range. If you collect a special token which is randomly dropped by enemies, you can ride on a flying dragon and really kick some ass. In both Tiger and Smokeman forms, you can also jump and attack enemies, which consists of you climbing on their back and beating them down from up above. There is a lot of blood in this game and I love it. There's something super satisfying about watching your enemies' heads hit the ground. The enemies in this game are no joke, and you will find yourself switching between Smokeman and the Tiger to try and find the better form to fight them with. The game will sometimes let you play as the knight itself if the attack is too weak to kill you, but just enough to kill your steed. You can transform as many times as you have stars. You start the game off with 3 stars, but you can find more on your dead enemies. Aside from the stars and the dragon orb, you can find 1-ups in the game as well. Speaking of the enemies, they are ugly as hell and extremely satisfying to destroy. You fight dog-faced dudes, minotaurs, the dudes from the movie The Gate, King Kong, and several others. The bosses in this game appear in pairs, except for Wildfang, and you can take them on solo or co-op with a friend. While the graphics and sounds of Wildfang aren't the best you'll see in the arcade, they fit the game. If you fail your mission, you are met with a pretty gnarly game over sequence that rivals Ninja Gaiden's. Take a look. Wildfang did not receive any ports to the home consoles. Oh boy, this one is a stinker, but I thought I'd include it in this list because it's a relatively obscure title. Akari Warriors returns in an overhead beat 'em up, which is shamefully bad. Gone are the weapons in this game. Well, not entirely, but the action focuses on punching and kicking enemies. The game also does away with vehicles you would sometimes ride in, and other weaponry is scarce in this game. Your mission is to rescue the president's child from kidnappers. It's a simple story that is probably the best part of the game. Let's talk about the combat. You can punch, kick, and jump kick your enemies as you try to rescue the child, but most of the punching and kicking will be done against you. The enemy AI is so incredibly cheap that the only time I was able to get a shot in most of the time was when I would get punched first, get knocked down, and take advantage of the brief invincibility window that you are given when you get back up. It's bad. The game's kicks and punches don't seem to make a difference. The combat is not enjoyable at all, and you will be dying a lot. From time to time, you can obtain a machine gun and a Rambo knife, but you won't last long with any of the weapons as your ammo is limited and your knife range stinks. This game is cheap, what can I say? The game stages look samey. Jungle, brown patch of land, building that houses bosses, rinse and repeat. It's nothing spectacular. The bosses are just as cheap as the regular enemies, but thankfully don't seem to have all that many hit points, and so your boss battles will be doable. The one thing about this game that is positive are the graphics and sounds. They aren't too shabby for the time. Overall, I would say pop a quarter in this game if you find it in the wild, just so you can experience all of the wonderful jankiness. The game was ported to the NES and goes for $100 complete in box and $40 loose. Let me start off by saying that the arcade version of a Styenx is quite different than the NES version. The Styenx for the arcades is a side-scrolling hack and slash with colorful character sprites and sharp graphics. The game looks nothing like the NES version and looks more like the excellent TurboGrafx-16 game Legendary Axe. The story in the Styenx revolves around a pair of mythical warriors who must eradicate the monsters from the land. This is a two-player co-op game, unlike the NES version. You arm yourself with an axe that is super satisfying to wield and destroy enemies with. The axe charges itself with power if you don't swing it, and once its power meter is full, you can unleash a stronger attack. It's a useful game mechanic when you have time to use it, which won't be too much. I found myself using quicker axe hits that are generally weaker but get the job done on most of the enemies. You also collect power-ups in this game that will allow you to do screen-clearing thunder attacks. The game's controls consist of an attack, jump, and magic button. Simple as good. The enemies you fight in the game's 6 stages consist of skeletons,